Will Goldstein here, thekingscourt.com, and there's a subscribe button down there you can hit if you like the videos. I think there are 73 subscribers now, I think, something like that. And also on videos, feel free to make comments if you, or like, even if you happen to like it. Okay, so this is from C.S. Lewis's book, The Four Loves, and it's based on that. This particular video he calls Eros. I'm adjusting the title a little bit, and I'm going to call it, because that's kind of what it's about, Eros, Venus, and God. So it's mostly about Eros and Venus, and of course I'm going to define those terms. In fact, that's exactly what I'm going to do before I even start what he says. First of all, Eros is a Greek god of erotic love. His purpose is to gratify the basic needs and to preserve and protect the body and mind. Eros is also, in the Romans mythology, he's the same as Cupid. Eros is a winged, chubby boy, and he's the son of Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love and fertility. In psychology, Eros is associated with sexual desire and libido. When I'm talking about erotic love, there's two aspects of that. There's both the romantic side and the love that's associated with human love between two humans, and there's also the carnal aspect. The way that this book is presented, Venus is associated with the sexual aspect of love, whether people are married or not, and the way that C.S. Lewis is defining Eros, he's associating that with the love aspect that may or may not include the sexual aspect. So hopefully that'll help for you to understand the way this book is, or this chapter is presented. Now I'm beginning what he has to say. By Eros, I mean being in love. So it's not just sex, it's being in love. I am mostly concerned with our subject of being in love. A sexual experience can occur without Eros, without being in love, and Eros includes things besides sexual activity. The carnal or animal-like sexual element within Eros I intend to call Venus, which again is a Roman goddess of sex. Sexuality may operate without Eros or as a part of Eros. I make the distinction without moral implications. I am not subscribing to the idea that the absence or presence of Eros makes the sexual act impure or pure, degraded, fine, lawful, or unlawful. Again, I'm paraphrasing. I'm not just reading this copyrighted, so I'm saying what he's saying. In his words mostly, most of our ancestors were married in early youth to partners that were chosen by their parents. And it really had nothing to do with love or with Eros. They went to the act, meaning sex, with plain animal desire. And they did so discharging their marriage debt by bringing up families under the influence of Eros. Eros may come as adultery. It may involve breaking a wife's heart, deceiving a husband, betraying a friend, or even deserting your own children. This act is justified or not by the keeping or breaking of promises, by justice or injustice, charity or selfishness, obedience or disobedience. To the evolutionist, Eros grows out of Venus, Again, sexual activity, a biological impulse. We must not assume this is necessarily what happens. There must be those who first felt sexual appetite for a woman, then at a later stage, they fall in love with her. I doubt if this is common. Often what comes first is a delighted preoccupation with the beloved. A man in this state is busy thinking of a person, thinking about who she is as herself. He's full of desire, but the desire may not be sexually toned. What he wanted would be to go on thinking about her, the beloved one that he desires as a person. At a later stage, the sexual element may awake. He will not feel this really had been the root of the whole matter. He is more likely to feel the tide of love or eros has now flooded his soul, his nature, and eros enters him like an invader, taking over and reorganizing his whole life. Eros wants the beloved. Sexual desire by itself, without eros, wants the body, the thing, which is sex. Eros wants the beloved. For Venus, the thing is sensual pleasure. Again, this is a distinction. Venus, he's saying, is just the sexual aspect. Venus, the thing, is sensual pleasure within one's body. A lustful man wants pleasure for which a woman happens to be the apparatus. How much he cares about the woman is gauged by his attitude. Eros makes a man want one particular woman. The lover desires the beloved herself, not merely the pleasure that she can give, which she probably will give, but that's not the main thing. No lover ever sought the embraces of the woman he loved as the result of a calculation. In sexual activity, that might be true of someone who just wants her body, but no lover, somebody who truly loves her, is what he's saying. If you raise the question, this would be to step outside of eros. Lucretius even gave his opinion that love impairs sexual pleasure. What beastly fellows these Romans were. So obviously Lucretius was a Roman. In Eros, need sees the object as a thing admirable in herself. Without Eros, sexual desire is about ourselves. With Eros, it is about the beloved, a mode of perception and expression. Eros, the king of pleasures, at his height, regards sexual pleasure as a byproduct. Eros obliterates the distinction between giving and receiving. Many unsophisticated people believe that the spiritual danger of Eros arises from the carnal element within it. Therefore, Venus, or sex, is reduced to the minimum. Moral theologians thought the dangers had to guard against in marriage was soul-destroying surrender of the senses. That's what they thought. St. Paul says nothing about that matter except to discourage prolonged absence from Venus. So what he's basically saying is Venus within marriage is a good thing and you should have that sex. Within marriage as without, the practical cares of this world are the great distraction. Petty anxieties and decisions interfered with prayers more than any passion. The great temptation of marriage is to avarice. The medieval guides were all celibates and did not know what Eros does to our sexuality. A preoccupation with the beloved can be an obstacle to spiritual life, but not chiefly a sensual preoccupation. In other words, idolizing the person is what he's saying. And the relationship between God and the human, and God and the human and lover. I believe we are all being encouraged to take Venus too seriously, sex too seriously, with a ludicrous solemnization of sex. Some say Venus should recur through the married life in a solemn sacramental rhythm. The dark gods attempt to restore this phallic religion by advertisements that paint the business in terms of rapt. The psychologists have bedeviled us with the infinite importance of sexual adjustment. Nothing is more needed than an old-fashioned roaring laugh. It will be replied, the thing is serious. Theologically, the body sharing marriage by God's choice is the mystical image of the union between God and man. As a pagan natural sacrament, it is participation in the natural forces of life and fertility. On the moral level, it is the obligations of being a parent. Finally, it has a great emotional seriousness in the minds of the participants. We must not be totally serious. Venus can't be serious without doing violence to our humanity. Language and literature in the world is full of jokes about sex. They embody an attitude to Venus that endangers the Christian life less than a reverential gravity. Banish play and laughter from the bed of love, and you may let in false goddess. Aphrodite of the Greeks, the goddess of love and fertility, they worshipped her, but she was laughter-loving, he says. People are right in their conviction that Venus is a comic spirit. Venus will have revenge if we take her seriousness at face value. Her service is the most foolish act a man commits in all his life, nor is there anything that will deject his imagination when he considers what folly he has committed. If he had gone about that act with less solemnity, he would not have suffered dejection. Venus has another revenge that is even worse. She is a mocking, mischievous spirit. When circumstances are fittest for her service, she will leave one or both lovers indisposed for it. When overt act is impossible and glances cannot be exchanged, she will assail them with all her force, with desire. Then she will have withdrawn. This, of course, raises resentments, self-pity, suspicions, wounded vanities, frustration in those who have deified her. Sensible lovers laugh. It is all part of the game. Catch me if you can. A sort of conquest for a trophy. I regard it as one of God's jokes on humanity. And Eros, Venus, reminds us we are captive, like buffoons, creatures that are akin on one side to the angels, on the other side to tomcats. A divine joke at our expense for our endless benefit, though. Man has three views of his body. First, that of the ascetic pagans who called it the prison or the tomb of the soul, and then for the Christians, like a man called Fisher, which I don't know, he calls it food for worms, the body. Nothing but temptation to bad men and humiliation to good ones. Then the neo-pagans, the nudists, who are suffering from the dark gods, to whom the body it is glorious, And thirdly, there is St. Francis, calling his body brother ass. All three may be defensible in one way or another, but give me St. Francis for my money. No one in his senses can revere or hate a donkey. It is deserving now the stick and now a carrot, pathetically and absurdly beautiful. There's no living with it till we recognize its functions is to play the part of a buffoon. The fact that we have bodies is the oldest joke there is. Eros may cause us to take it with seriousness. The error consists in concluding that Eros should do so and abolish the joke. Lovers feel an element of comedy, play, even buffoonery in the body's expressions of Eros. The body would frustrate it if this were not so. The highest does not stand without the lowest. There is, at certain moments, a high poetry in the flesh. If it does not make itself felt on one occasion, it will on another. Far better is the drama of Eros, comic relief that we require. Her burning weight of desire, the pleasure to its extremes, the longing for a union only the flesh can mediate, while our mutually excluding bodies renders it forever unattainable as a metaphysical pursuit. Amorousness as well as grief brings tears to the eyes. Venus does not always come fastened to her prey. She sometimes does, the reason for preserving playfulness in our attitude to her. When natural things look most divine, the demoniac is just around the corner. A certain attitude which Venus evokes is that this act can invite the man to an extreme, short-lived masterfulness, to the dominance as though he is a conqueror, and the woman now is in subjection and surrender. Concerning the fierceness of some erotic play, how should a sane couple think of it, or a Christian couple permit it? He doesn't really add this part here, but I'm just going to add it. He's talking about the fierceness in erotic play. This, you could make you think of things like sadomasochism or BDSM. I don't know much about this, but what is it? Bondage discipline and sadomasochism. I don't know. But it's the dominatrix and this sort of activity in Venus, the sexual pursuit, could be seen in the Kabbalist literature as Samael and Lilith. Samael is the chief demon, and his spouse is Lilith, sort of the goddess of pornography. But anyway, that's aside on Venus. I think it is harmless concerning a sort of jovial play that exists in using the word that he says, fierceness, on one condition: we recognize the pagan sacrament and sex. So he's associating those two. In the act of love, we are representatives, aware that forces older than we work through us. Masculinity and femininity, momentarily focused, give value to the word play. A mystery play or ritual at one extreme, a charade at the other. A woman who accepts her own self-surrender would be an idolatress offering to a man what only really belongs to God. And a man would be a blasphemer if he arrogated to himself, as the mere person he is, the sort of sovereignty that really only belongs to God, as though Venus is exalting him. But what cannot lawfully be claimed can be lawfully enacted. in this ritual or drama, he and she in marriage is where the mastery is asserted. So he's talking about sex inside of marriage and outside of marriage. Within the rite, they become a god and goddess whose relations are asymmetrical, meaning within marriage, not outside marriage. Some will think it strange I should find an element of ritual in that action regarded as the most real we ever do. Are we not our true selves when we are naked? Then he says, in a sense, no. The word naked was originally a past participle involving a process of naking, and that is a stripping or peeling away of nuts and fruit. Nudity emphasizes common humanity. As a clothed individual, we are more ourselves. Nature crowns man in the brief action of sex. Christian law has crowned him in the permanent relationship of marriage, bestowing a certain headship on him. The husband is the head of the wife, as he is to her what Christ is to the church. He is to love her as Christ loved the church. He's talking about Ephesians 5, verse 25. Headship in the husband is like a crucifixion. A wife who receives most and gives least is unworthy of him, and in her own nature becomes unlovable. The church has beauty in what the bridegroom gives her. He makes her lovely. Christ sees the flawed, proud, fanatical, perhaps even the lukewarm church as a bride that one day will be without spot. So the husband whose headship is Christ-like never despairs. However, there is no virtue or wisdom in making a marriage miserable through things like martyrdom or persecution, yet it is the persecuted, martyred Christian in whom the master is most realized. In terrible marriages, once they come about, the headship of the husband, if he can sustain it, is the most Christ-like. So what he's saying is, you have a terrible marriage, and the husband is doing everything to save it, and if he actually succeeds in doing that, then he is the most Christ-like, rather than just giving up. The real danger is that husbands will allow or compel their wives to usurp the crown. It is useless to try to separate lovers by saying their marriage will be an unhappy one. They will disbelieve you, no doubt, but even if they believed, they would not be dissuaded. It is the very mark of Eros, Cupid's arrow, that we would rather share happiness with the beloved than be happy on any other terms. People know that broken hearts heal, and if they go through the agony of parting, they would almost certainly be happier 10 years hence. But to Eros, these calculations are irrelevant. Even when marriage cannot possibly lead to happiness, Eros never hesitates to say, better this than parting, better to be miserable with her than happy without her. Let our hearts break provided they break together. The grandeur of love is the playfulness, the subject of countless jokes. Even when the circumstances of the two lovers is tragic, a bystander will sometimes be surprised by a merriment which strikes the onlooker, but not them, as unbearably pathetic. Until they have a baby to laugh at, lovers they're always laughing, basically, at each other. It is the grandeur of Eros that seeds of danger are concealed by his total commitment, even a disregard of happiness. Eros may urge us to evil as well as to good. Love may lead to sin, or a faithful, fruitful, and Christian marriage. Love which leads to cruel and perjured unions, even suicide pacts or murder, this is not likely to be some sort of wandering lust or idle sentiment. It may be Eros, sincere, ready for every sacrifice except renunciation. Plato will have it that falling in love is the mutual recognition of souls singled out for one another in a previous celestial existence. Eros may unite unsuitable yokefellows. Many predictable unhappy marriages were love matches. In Shavian romanticism, the voice of Eros is the life force, the evolutionary appetite. It aims at the future perfection of our species. Pictures of supermen are so unattractive that one might vow celibacy to avoid begetting him. With the existence of Eros, there is no warrant that their offspring will be satisfactory or that they will have offspring at all. Good stock breeders, not good lovers, is the recipe for fine children. Neither the Platonic nor the Shavian type of erotic transcendentalism can help a Christian. We are not worshippers of life force, and we know nothing of previous existences. We must not give unconditional obedience to Eros when he speaks like a god. Neither must we deny his godlike quality. There is a nearness to God by resemblance, but not by approach. Eros honored so far as love of God and charity may become a means of approach. Concerning charity, Christ said, "You are to love me and the least of my brethren." Eros will vary with circumstances. Of some, total renunciation, but not contempt is required. So he's talking about being single as a personal choice. Others, with Eros, can embark on the married life. Eros himself will never be enough. He must be chastened by higher principles. He's talking about adding God into the equation. Eros, honored without reservation, obeyed unconditionally, becomes a demon. This is how he claims to be honored and obeyed. In other words, he becomes a demon, for example, by somebody being addicted to pornography or free love or whatever, all the other things, poly and all the other things that are involved in that mindset, which I want nothing to do with. He is demonically rebellious to every claim of God or man that would oppose him. In other words, he wants to be God instead of the true God. A poet says, "People in love cannot be moved by kindness, and opposition makes them feel like martyrs." How many marriages are like that? Eros, of all loves, is most godlike, most prone to demand our worship, tends to turn being in love into a sort of religion. Some theologians have often feared this Eros is a danger towards idolatry. The lovers might idolize one another. The businesslike intimacy of married life renders this absurd, so does affection. Even in courtship, I question whether anyone who has thirst for God ever supposed that the beloved could satisfy it. The beloved may be gloriously relevant as an object of worship. This is ridiculous. The danger lovers have is that they will idolize Eros himself, not each other. I do not mean that they'll build altars or say prayers to him. Our Lord's words, and that her sins, which are many, are forgiven her, for she loved much, which is Luke 7:47. This must mean the greatness of her love, meaning the sinner's love for me, meaning God, is evidence of the greatness of the sins I, meaning God, have forgiven her. But not, I forgive her unchastity because she was so much in love. The implication is Eros sanctions any actions that leads to love. When lovers say of some act that we might blame, love made me do it, he is putting forward an excuse. He's appealing to an authority. The confession is almost a boast. There is a shade of defiance in it. They feel like martyrs. Their words express allegiance to the God of love who made me do it. Says Milton's Delilah, the point is this: in love we have our own religion, our own God. Where Eros is present, what are, by Christian standards, temptations, they speak with the voice of quasi-religious duties to love, a religion round the lovers themselves. The history of Israel is the Old Testament of love's religion, the record of love's judgments and mercies by God towards his chosen people when they first knew that they were lovers. The New Testament begins under a new law. By grace ye have been saved. We are now new creatures. In contrast, the spirit of Eros supersedes all laws. It sanctions actions that may, under certain circumstances, violate chastity, acts of injustice or uncharity, like proofs of piety and zeal towards Eros. The pair can say to one another, "It is for love's sake that I have neglected my parents, or left my children to who knows who, and cheated on my partner whenever I failed like it, or failed my friend when he was in need." These reasons in love's law passed for good. They even come to feel merit in such sacrifices. All for love's sake. We can do anything, any injustice is what he's saying. The joke is that Eros seems to speak from the eternal realm, seen as some sort of god. But the world rings with his fickleness. To be in love is a promise of lifelong fidelity, true love. Love makes vows. I will be ever true. First words he ever utters when he gets married, he and she utter. We've all heard of people in love again every few years, and this time they're really sincere. This time it's the real thing, the real deal. They have found their true love at last. Eros is in a sense right to make this promise. Falling in love is of such a nature that we are right to reject the idea that it can be transitory. In one high on love, he has overstepped the wall of selfhood, made appetite altruistic, personal happiness a triviality, and planted the interest of another in the center of being. We have fulfilled the law by loving our neighbor as ourselves, an image of what we must become if love himself rules in us. In other words, true love. Earthly love is a preparation for that. To fall out of love is a sort of disredemption. Eros promises what Eros cannot perform. The question is, Can we be in this selfless liberation for an entire lifetime? And for those enchanted, they can be in that state hardly for a week. In other words, they just got married and they're already totally just enchanted within a week. Between the best lovers, this high condition is intermittent. The old self soon returns not dead as he pretended after some sort of religious conversion. He will rise up again, roaring or grumbling. Venus will slip back into mere sexuality. In other words, together after a week or so, some lovers are already just going to the sex because they're already disenchanted. These lapses will not destroy a marriage between two decent and very sensible people. The couple whose marriage will be endangered and perhaps even possibly ruined are those who idolized Eros. Is God part of the equation or just sex and Eros? Venus and Eros. They expected mere feeling to be all that was necessary, those who were captured by merely Eros and Venus. When they became disappointed, they throw the blame on Eros or their partners. Eros made his promise. He has done his stuff. He, like some sort of godparent, chooses the vows, and we must keep them. So those whose only god is Eros and Venus. It is we who labor to bring daily life in accordance with what is revealed. In other words, Eros makes his commands and we're supposed to do the job for those who are under Eros. This all good lovers know and will be able to express it by taking the rough along with the smooth, not expecting too much, having common sense. Christian lovers know this will be carried out only by humility, charity, and divine grace. In other words, God is part of the triangle, okay? Their marriage is based on God, and they know that there's going to be rough times. They know that it's not all going to be smooth, and they know that they shouldn't be expecting too much. Thus, Eros, in a relationship based on Eros, reveals his true status. Eros needs help. He needs to be ruled. He becomes a demon unless he obeys God. So now he's talking about sort of this Eros can be under the dominion of God or not. It depends on whether God is part of the equation. So he's saying, he's just making God at the top and then Eros and even Venus in subjection to the true God. Then as Eros and Venus know that they need help, then they can be ruled. Otherwise, he by himself is a demon. In bad marriages, not based on God, he lives on, chaining together two mutual tormentors, each with the poison of hate in love. In other words, today I hate you, tomorrow I love you sort of relationship. Refusing to give, jealous, often suspicious or resentful, always struggling for the upper hand, and determined to be free, but then to allow no freedom. In other words, a religion not based on real love, but based on power, is what I would add to this. This is just another pathetic scene in a tragic novel that has now horribly become the truth in those unfortunate souls ruled by Eros and Venus alone instead of by God.